Hi everybody, thank you for coming today. My name is Lauren Malloy. I'm here with the Prince William County Office of Historic Preservation, and I'm really here, as you've probably heard, to talk about the exhibit that our office developed in coordination with the community to talk about the history of Thoroughfare. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, give you a brief history of Thoroughfare today, and then go through our exhibits. We actually have two about this small community. So just to preface this, Office of Historic Preservation, we're a county office and we manage 15 historic sites, soon to be 16, and we cover a diverse amount of history in the county. We have Ripon Lodge, which explores colonial history. That's on the eastern side of the county. We also have two county seats. So we have the 4th county seat, which was at Brentsville Courthouse. That's more in the center of the county. That was started in 1822. And then we have the Old Manassas Courthouse, which is the 5th county seat, very close to here. We also have a home that served as a Civil War hospital, Ben Lomond Historic Site, if any of you have been there as well. We also have a Civil War battlefield at Bristow. I did want to briefly mention the Ned Distiller House is in the Buckland Historic District. The county recently acquired it and our office will manage it. And that was actually owned by an African-American man with the name of Ned Distiller. We believe it might be, and I'll get this right, the first known home in Virginia to be purchased by a former slave, as the home itself dates all the way back to 1819. So an incredible area for preservation and interpretation, and we hope to tell you more about that in the future. But again, I'm here today to talk a little bit about the community of Thoroughfare. I'm going to give you a little bit of background and tell you a little bit about where it is if you don't know already. It's a very small community, and I'll show you on a map in a bit if you're not familiar, in western Prince William County. It's right against the border of Fauquier County near Haymarket. And these are just a few images that show, I'll show you many more, of the historic Thoroughfare. The home on the right there that you see on the right slide is believed to be the oldest home in Thoroughfare. It's also known as Aunt Betty's house, but it was owned, we specifically call it the James and Emily Mount House as well. There is a historical sign that was put up specifically by the community with working with our historical commission over a decade ago called Free People of Color at Thoroughfare, and that's just an image of the community. It was established after the Civil War by freed slaves and mixed-race families, including those of Native American descent from surrounding counties. And many of the property lines and the roads that you see here today are derived from the division of property in the early 19th century. It was the property of the Edward Carter estate. It consisted of over 5,000 acres, and Edward Carter was the grandson of Robert King Carter, if any of you are familiar with that name. I'm sure many of you are. This division of property was to his 5 children, and again, this was known as the Cloverland property. One of these children, his name was John Hill Carter, was very influential in the Manassas Gap Railroad and was very influential in bringing then this railroad through the community of Thoroughfare. So if you go to this area, the railroad runs right through the community, and it was specifically due to John Hill Carter's influence. The stop was initially known as Carter's Switch, and it greatly impacted the Thoroughfare community both during and after the Civil War. And again, I'll go a little bit more into how this research came about. But the most significant date when we talk about Thoroughfare, we say is 1873, because we understand this to be the first property transfer to an African-American man in the area. His name was Thomas Primus, and we have a picture of the deed here. And again, that's from 1873. To the left is the grave of Thomas Primus as well. And this is when the researchers definitively traced this early transfer of property. So just to give a little bit of background about that as well, although Thoroughfare existed prior to the Civil War, the existing town in its current location started in the decades after 1865. And much of this core Cloverland tract was owned by somebody named Mary Walker Carter Dulaney and her husband, Captain Bladen Tasker Dulaney. And this passed to her sons after Captain Dulaney's death, but a very common storyline in the time was that debt forced the sons to divide the property. So ultimately, this property went to Caroline Dulaney. In September of 1873, Caroline Dulaney then conveyed 20 acres of land to Thomas Primus, and we have a record of that. So these records and a map, which I'll show you later, indicate that Primus lived on the land prior to officially owning it. The Primus property is essential to the development of the community, as members of the Primus family eventually opened a store on this lot. and even donated land to establish the North Fork School, which served the children of Thoroughfare from 1885 to 1936. So again, that's just a very brief overview. I'm going to talk a little bit then about the exhibits. And if you have any questions more about the history, of course, ask me, but we do cover a great deal more in the online exhibit, which I'll go through. This gives you a sense of what we're looking at as far as where the county-owned property is. So this is Historic Thoroughfare, very small section of it, of course. It was purchased by the county in 2019, and again, it is managed by our office. It contains 2 historic cemeteries, the Fletcher Allen Cemetery and a community cemetery. And when our office started doing work here, it included a great deal of preservation work. So there is new fencing at both of the sites, cleaning the cemeteries as well. And then there was also a GPR. GPR stands for Ground Penetrating Radar. And there was a survey of Pottersfield, the cemetery. A grant went to do that. So it showed exactly where the locations of the graves in Potter's Cemetery are and gave us a lot of more information about that specific cemetery. It also delineated the boundaries of the cemetery so that our office was able to fence that off. But it is currently not accessible to the public, which I'll go into a little bit more about why we developed these exhibits. Part of the resources that the county dedicated towards Thoroughfare at this time, a lot of it was dedicated towards research, which is why we have these exhibits. And these research were done by a group called Dovetail Cultural Resource Group on behalf of the county, but they uncovered quite a bit of information. And I'll go through a little bit about what these pictures are. But they worked very closely with the community, and there are lots of different prongs to this actual research project. So there was an archaeological assessment of the area. They did architectural studies of the area, so looking at the kinds of houses that are still surviving in Thoroughfare. Archival research, which uncovers things like, you'll see this plat map here, talking about property ownership in Thoroughfare. And then they worked with community to do oral histories. They actually did 11 oral histories. And through these oral histories, I think all of the photos you see up here were contributed by the community to this research project. So I mentioned North Fork School, which is a school that operated in the late 19th century, serving the African-American children of the community. That is a picture there. I believe that was donated by Donald Christian. To the right is the Simmons House. So this area has always been a focal point of a lot of change. And they moved a few houses when Interstate 66 came through the area. So that's them actually physically moving a home in Thoroughfare. And then I think I've mentioned, if I haven't already, the gentleman that you see below is Frank Fletcher. And this photograph was donated by Frank Washington. Frank Fletcher is one of the original founders of Thoroughfare. And we also know that he built many of the houses in Thoroughfare. There are a few remaining, which is incredible, that we know that Frank Fletcher, he's attributed to having built those. They also defined recommendations and are in the process of moving ahead towards a National Register nomination. That is not undertaken by our office, it's the planning office, but they're moving forward with that again in coordination with the community. So there are efforts to further preserve and tell the history of this community. Once this project was done and the research concluded, our office's job was then to share this information. And how do you share information when you don't have a site to bring people to tell people about the history? And so that's why we decided on basically a 2-pronged approach to doing this. And we decided to do a story map that uses ArcGIS. So maps, online maps to really situate users and show you where things are on the landscape. So it's a great way of telling a story. Because you can explore the history. You can see we have standard text and photos here, but as I'll go through later, we also have great maps where we're able to do historic overlay maps onto the present landscape so you can see how it changed, where those boundaries are. And we decided this would be a great way to bring people in, show people the history of the community when we're unable to really bring them there. These are some of the historic overlay maps that we have. We have 2 or 3, and again, Dovetail, who did a lot of the work, helped us develop these maps, and we were able to then incorporate them into the exhibit. So this one in particular, it's an 1871 survey of Cloverland, which is the area I was talking to you about. So a lot of the divisions, you can actually still see then on these old maps. I don't have it marked here, but if you do look at the online exhibit, you'll also be able to see we marked where Thomas Primus's land is on this map. And looking at maps like this, we then realized, we didn't, the researchers did, that Thomas Primus was actually living on the land well before he officially owned it, which is pretty incredible, being able to trace that his family had been there for quite some time and then officially owned it in 1873. So we have that document, but we do know from these earlier maps that he had been there for a while. I think the main portion of this exhibit then is actually an online way where you can explore Thoroughfare. So you've probably seen these as online tours when you're able to go to different points on the map and really explore Thoroughfare all virtually. Again, that's important because I would say 90% of the sites on this map are either private property, so they're private homes in the community, or potentially other places that you can't visit. So this is really the only way to tell people about the history, and you can also get a sense of where it is on the landscape. If you're familiar with the area and the roads that go, 66 is very close to up here. So, and this again is the house that I mentioned before, the James and Emily Mount house. Again, we're able to speak a little bit about the history. Most Thoroughfare residents who live there now call it Aunt Betty's house. And she was the one, there is another owner, but she was the one who's definitely attributed to living there that most people recognize. So we encourage people to visit different sites. Oakland Baptist Church is on here. There are different cemeteries. It's not comprehensive, but it's some of the history that we have. And another great way to talk about the history, there are certain points on this map that they're no longer there. So most of the stores, there are a lot of stores that operated in Thoroughfare. Most of them are no longer there, but we can show people where the Primus store was actually located by looking at this map. And if you took this map out to Thoroughfare, you could see approximately where it is. So the last thing, and I'll play this clip hopefully in a second, as I mentioned, as part of the research project, they did an oral history. So it says 6 interviews. Some of these interviews, I said before, was 11. Some of these interviews involved multiple people in an interview. And typically when you do oral histories, what happens is there are transcripts of everything you talked about, and then there's a report. And usually the report then summarizes what people talked about, and then kind of makes conclusions from there. But other than that, then the audio clips, typically they're preserved, but nobody goes back and listens to them. So we thought it would be a good way to actually include this into the online exhibit. So certain stops, when you go to them, and this one specifically, I'll play it, when you go to Oakland Baptist Church, you'll be able to actually hear somebody's recollections of what the church was like to them and what it meant to their family. So to us, it adds a little bit of depth. It enables us to use the audio that otherwise people wouldn't be hearing. And then again, it describes these places, not only the way we see them today, but how they're remembered in the community. So I'll play this.
Yeah, Second Sunday was an event that everybody came back for, even now. That was something everybody lived for, because all the out-of-town relatives come back, and it's just like the place to be.
How many people will you remember in your days? Is it just
300. 300.
Oh gosh.
This yard will be packed.
Yeah.
And because lying alongside the road,
Yes.
I mean, it's just unbelievable.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And were I assume your family was involved in the church too?
Oh yes.
You said somebody was
My grandfather was a head deacon here.
So I'll stop it there. It's a little hard to hear, but hopefully if you go and you hear, again, what she's describing is homecoming, which a lot of local churches do have. We're working also with the settlement community, and they have one at their church as well, Mount Pleasant Baptist Church, which is when, even when members of the community have moved away, they come back annually for this homecoming. So she's describing what that was like and what it still is like at Oakland Baptist Church, which is a very active church still in the community. So I'll start closing here, just where you can find this online exhibit. So again, I work for the Office of Historic Preservation. We do have a specific historic communities page. So we have different things on here. Most of it is oral history reports. So we do have the oral history report as well from Historic Thoroughfare, as also ones with the settlement, Batestown, which is a community in eastern Prince William County. But you'll find the exhibit here. And it is also linked, and I'll speak a little bit about, to QR codes on our physical exhibit. So there are multiple ways that people can access this and learn a little bit more. As I mentioned before, the physical exhibit is really just a brief overview. So the common complaint we got from the community when we sent those panels to the community, they said, well, this isn't the history of Thoroughfare. We said, I get it. But it's hard to do that in 4 panels. So we're able to go through a little bit more in the online exhibit. And also, if you go to the end of the exhibit, you'll find a great deal of links where you can go, you can read the whole oral history report. You can read the link to the archaeological assessment. You can find all sorts of things, presentations that Dovetail did about the history of the area, which they go into much more depth than what I went into. All of that is linked to this online exhibit, and it's also something we can constantly edit and change, whereas obviously a physical exhibit is a little harder to update as we go along. So usually things are flipped. Usually you have when you're in the curatorial world, you have your physical exhibit first, and then you develop an online exhibit from that. But this was, again, developed afterwards. And again, this is really just a way to tell more people about the history of this community and raise awareness about that. And we are going, so it came out this past fall. It was at the Haymarket Library. It will be at Central Library. We have a brief interruption next week to take it to a program, but it will be here through the end of February. We are taking it to the Haymarket Museum. In January, we had it at the Afro-American Historical Society of Fauquier County, and it will probably go back there for the summer. So if you have people who are still interested in seeing it, we're probably going to take it back there we only had it there for a couple weeks in January, so we'll probably go back through the summer of 2025. Just a little idea of where it's going to be, and we'd love for more people to know about it.